Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. For this week's drawing, I will be working on the mermaid character, which I created a couple weeks ago. As usual, I started off this drawing by layering down the skin tone. For this drawing, I really wanted to keep those muscle lines that I worked so hard to draw along his abs, and I wanted to keep them somewhat defined, without being too harsh, of course. To that end, I used a sienna brown Prismacolor pencil and lightly outlined the shaded areas of his abs. And then I went over that with E00 Cotton White to use as my blanket skin tone. As usual, while this layer seems to be very light, I will add detail and depth by shading the skin tone over several different times. So that will help give it a nice layered look and make it look more realistic and more three-dimensional. I now went through and added some preliminary shading using E50, which is eggshell. And then I also went up to his ear and I blended that out with a little bit of eggplant. I think it's V28. And I did that because I really wanted that color to be defined there because it's going to be the same colors in his tail. After putting down a layer of C3 for the shading on his tail and C1 as a blanket color for his tail, to shading some of the darker areas around his hairline and all those really dark areas. So I used cashmere for this, which is Y32, and I went through and made sure that all those really dark spots were properly shaded and then blended. Now, even then, it wasn't quite dark enough for me, so I'm going to go through later and darken it using colored pencils. For the rest of this illustration, I actually followed pretty accurately my color map that I created a couple weeks ago. If you want to see it, I will have a link in the description and in the I button above. So, in order to create the seaweed wrap for his arms, I used G12, which is a very light green, and G28 to blend it all out and make it look rather shiny. And then I added B39, which is Prussian blue, to create a lot of depth, to really create shadows. And I blended them all out very well, as I've described in previous videos. Blending is really key to providing nice transitions and really creating a character that will pop. For his coral trident, I prepared the gem areas on it using masking fluid and layering over it RV69, RV66, and E59, which is walnut brown. And the E59 I layered into shadows kind of intermittently to give the impression of texture. I then used a toothpick with a little bit of masking fluid still on it to lift up all of the masking fluid. And then I went through and created the gems using G12. His armor plates were created using E00 as a blanket color again, and then I put in a little bit of R20 to give it a little bit of a pink color, and I blended that out again with the cotton white or cotton pearl, and then I began to just layer up just several different colors to incorporate all the colors that I've already used to make it all a cohesive piece, and B, to make it look realistic. If you look at an abalone shell, there are just different colors and it looks kind of rough on the outside, but you can still see kind of the multicolored pearlescence from the inside, sometimes coming out to the out. So I layered my RV69, my E59, my V28, and I even layered BG05 and B12, and that really created this rather interesting texture. I wanted him to have brown hair, but since he's underwater, I wanted to have a little bit of fun with the shine in his hair. So the shine in his hair is actually B12, a light layer of it put into the highlight area. And then I layered on my E59, my walnut brown, and then I shaded it with a combination of B39 and my black color to create a really nice and detailed hair texture. Don't worry if you get out of the lines on this. It's really hard to control the rather large brush tip. So what I'll do when I'm finished with this is I'll go through using my multiliner, and I'm going to kind of clean up the edges and make the tips of the hair look even more sharp and realistic. Ta-da! Now there's suddenly a seahorse next to him. So I saw this space next to him, and I realized that I wanted something in there because otherwise it'd just be a whole bunch of blank blue, and I didn't want that. So I created this seahorse, which actually has its own backstory, which I'll discuss, and the design process of this character, which will be uploaded in a separate video, a bonus video this week. So I went ahead and lightly lined it using my multiliner. I didn't know what parts needed to be lined darkly, so I went through and did it all fairly light at the moment so I can kind of work the character in. And then I went through and shaded the character using the same color palette that I used on the merman. So I will include a list of the colors used in the description box below if you'd like to see what I used and follow along. It was now that I decided to work on the water in the background. This was mostly so that I could get the color values of the background itself before I moved on to the character, and this would help me determine how dark I needed the tail or even how light I needed the tail. So I went through and added the first bit was B12. It's my lightest blue, and I just kind of blanketed the color in just to kind of figure out where I wanted the colors to be and what layers I wanted. It also helped me kind of determine how I wanted the seahorse framed, and I knew that the seahorse was pretty light, so I wanted to have that part done first so I could kind of block out and frame the seahorse. I then went down to the bottom and used Prussian blue to create the darkest area. Well, not quite the darkest because I did use black, but one of the darker areas. This was very difficult to do because I had to use the very tip of my marker, but my marker, the brush tip, is going out a little bit on my Prussian blue, so it meant that it would put very fine lines really close to the other lines, but it would make it look streaky, so it was hard to kind of create that nice even tone that I wanted. I then blended it out with my black marker. I blended very well using the Prussian blue and then immediately the black and then immediately the Prussian blue again. So to do this, I usually work in small sections, that way the colors don't dry out too much. Also, as you can see here, I decided to kind of go and block out where I wanted the dark blue to end, to stop, and I kind of knew I wanted it to be able to frame a magic effect, which I'm going to put on the Trident later, but not be kind of blaringly obvious. So that was the reason why I put the dark blue in where I did. Now, for the mid-tone color, I used BG05. So in a future video, I will describe to you kind of the Copic marker coloring system, and there I'll tell you more about this, but because it's a BG and the other two are just B, that means that there is quite a different kind of color value to BG05. So it meant that I had to be very careful while blending it to make it look kind of seamless. So here is where I actually think I blended using 3 or 4 layers in order to create a nice smooth transition. This also kind of created a difficulty because remember I told you that you have to use fairly still damp marker color, and then when I went back through to put to blend the BG05 into the B12, it meant that it was still dry. So I had to go through and be very careful, and once again, I think this one actually took like six different layers of blending so that it would look seamless and kind of give you more of a realistic feel. Now that I could see how the color values are, I decided to go through and darken different portions of his scales and tail. So this character does have a bit of a backstory about his scales on the rest of his body, but I kind of like it when a merman or a mermaid can have a kind of smooth transition between the tail and the human side. So I put scales kind of diminishing up his body in order to create this kind of seamless feel to the character. That's also the reason why I made sure that the scales that were right up against his body were much more defined, and actually drew out maybe like 2 or 3 rows worth of scales that were used in molten liner. Now I'm also going through and working on the seahorse to make sure that the color of the seahorse matches the color of the character himself. And now I'm going through with my burnt sienna again to kind of start to indicate some deeper shadows on his body. Sometimes when I'm at a loss of what to do in different parts of the picture or the drawing, I will kind of go on and do some of my final line work on the areas that I know are finished. And to be honest, it was at this stage I hated the scales that I had created, especially on his tail, which you don't see in this frame right now, but it was because I was so horrified with what happened. They were too obvious, and I had no idea how to fix it, and I was at a complete loss. I was like, great, I've ruined this. What am I going to do now? But I did actually come up with a solution. And what I decided to do for this was I went through and took my colored pencils and lightly colored in purples and grays and blues into different areas on the scales that I had created already, kind of the indication of the cross-hatching of the scales. That meant that those really obvious scales suddenly kind of blended into the rest of the picture. Unfortunately, aside from what you see here, I didn't get very much footage of me actually going through and darkening some of it with my colored pencils. My other memory card, my backup memory card, had died on me, so I don't have any footage of the rest of this process. Here you can see me adding the different textures to the scales, and already just at that top half it looks so much better. This is what I'm talking about not being afraid to experiment. And here is the finished illustration. I want to thank you guys so much for watching my video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye!